Hello and good morning. I hope you're enjoying your fall break or your early start to fall break. And thank you for tuning in so you could keep up with what we're going to do or what we could have done in class, but we didn't. So, if you're following along with the series of videos that I posted on Canvas for you guys, you're now looking at video number 2. And what you did in the first video is you worked with linear forecasting. Specifically, you worked with linear regression, and you also looked at the forecast linear function. So now that forecast linear function is really great, and in many ways it just does regression for you, which we really, really love, as long as you remember to look at the standard error that goes along with what you're doing, and you look at the R square that goes along with what you're doing. And that's something we touched on in the last video. So I don't want to go that far into it in this video because this one is a different kind of thing. So what I've got here is I've got sales for a company, and I've got historic sales, right? So a time series of sales from 1995 going all the way down to 2009, right? Now, if you look at this, I don't want you to look at these two columns just yet. So let me just hide these. Of course, you've now immediately looked at them because I said I don't want you to look at these columns yet. I simply just want you to look at the years here and the revenue you've made here. So you know that one of the first things you're going to do if you're using regression or if you're looking at some kind of linear analysis, or even if you're just using the forecast linear function, you know that there is an assumption that your data is linear, right? So what's an easy way to check, or at least to look and get a ballpark idea, is you can create a visual. So I could jump in and grab this data, okay, and I'm going to insert a scatter plot, or actually I'm going to insert a line chart. And when I look at my data, well, you know what I see is I see my data actually isn't super linear. It actually looks to me like there's some kind of pattern happening in this data. And that pattern is not necessarily linear. There's a pattern for sure, and we can model off this pattern. We should be able to work with it. But we have to acknowledge first and foremost that this is not a linear pattern. Okay? So this pattern that you see is actually a very, very common cyclical pattern that happens in business. The pattern that you're actually seeing is a seasonal pattern, right? And those are the two things that I've hidden. So if I'm going to unhide these, you'll see now that I've got season and then I've got the quarterly data, right? So quarter 1 through 4, and it's showing each quarter all the way up to quarter 57, or 57 quarters from the original start point. And you'll see that there's seasons that go along with this, right? Our data has some kind of seasonality. So when you're working with seasonal data is not necessarily linear in nature, it's seasonal in nature. And what you need to understand is that the linear function, the forecast linear function, can't work with seasonal data, okay? So what I want to show you is a different kind of function that does have the ability to work with seasonal data, the forecast ETS function. But then I also want to show you how to use the data analysis Toolpak to create something called a moving average, which would work really, really well in this particular scenario. So today we're going to focus on the moving average concept. I'm going to show you how to manually calculate a moving average, and I'm going to show you how to use the data analysis Toolpak to calculate a moving average, and then we'll talk about what that kind of metric or KPI, key performance indicator, is going to do for you. So one of the things we're going to look at here, so when we want to start analyzing our data, let's start by trying to create a moving average. So what is a moving average? So we'll call it an annual moving average or a fourth quarter moving average. And what that's going to do for you is it's going to take the whole first 4 quarters here, right? And we're going to average those together, and we're going to start using that like a predictive tool. So we take the average of a 4-quarter moving window, and then we're going to move that window down month by month, well, not month by month, but quarter by quarter, in order to create a predicted value of what we think is going to happen, right? So here's what we actually have happened here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a moving average sort of based on that, right? So it gives us the ability to create a trend line that's going to much more smoothly hug a line. So let me go back and create that chart one more time for you. And let's see the difference of what we can do by using a moving average instead of trying to work with linear. So I'm just going to move this up. And let's apply that linear trend line. Let's just jump in here. And here's that linear trend line. And if you look at it, it doesn't really hug that line very well. And what we discussed earlier when we did regression was that actual trend line that you shoot through there, that's the line that you're actually using for your prediction. So you want that model line to hug whatever your actual data points would be as closely as humanly possible. And in this case, it's not terrible. I bet if I were to turn the R square on, it wouldn't be horribly off because this does happen to be growing. Our sales are growing over time, but they're also growing cyclically, right? Seasonally. So I want to show you a tool that will allow us to do that, but I'm also going to show you how to do it manually. It's actually not horribly difficult to do manually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my 4 quarters here, right? So here's quarter 1, 2, 3, 4. And here are my parts per million, or my revenue in millions for those first 4 quarters. So I'm going to start right here, and I'm just going to write the old school average function, like so. Okay? And if I look at that, it's going to say, well, this is the average in millions of the first 4 quarters. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start filling that down. Whoops. I'm going to start filling that down. And when I fill it down, here's what it's going to do for me. Doop. So I filled it down. See what it did? It moved that window of 4 down, right? So I have 4 predictive values before that I'm basically averaging up to try to look into what the next amount would be. So I'm just slowly going to move that moving average down like so. And as I do this, it's just a 4 square moving window, right? So if I jump down here, it's the last 4. If I jump back up, it's showing me the previous 4 quarters. So that window is moving down, 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 down. Okay? So that's our first step. So now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to chart this again. And I want to show you, and notice that the first 4 quarters, of course, aren't going to have anything. I want to show you what that's going to look like if I chart these 2 data points together. And let's just take a look. So let's grab these 2 data points, right? Our moving average, okay, and our actual data points. So we're just going to jump in. We're going to chart these out. And what that's going to do for you, if you look at this, is it's going to smooth that predictor line out a little bit more, right? So it's not completely going up and down, hugging it up and down, up and down, up and down, but it's starting to smooth this out just a little bit more. So it's giving you a slightly closer predictor versus if you're looking at this linear data, right? And it's just something we can use as a metric, something we can use to compare our data seasonally. It's just smoothing that out. Now what I want to show you though is inside Excel, you can actually do this exact same thing. You don't have to do the math. There's a tool in the data analysis Toolpak that will give you the ability to create that moving average as a way of assessing your data without having to do the math. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump in and we're going to turn on the data analysis Toolpak. So let me do that slower for you. So I'm going to go to the File tab in the ribbon. Okay, I'm going to go down to Options. From Options, I'm going to go to Add-ins. Okay, I'm going to go to Excel Add-ins and click Go. And I'm going to turn on my Analysis Toolpak. So notice there's a couple. Analysis Toolpak with VBA. We just want the first one, Analysis Toolpak. So I'm going to go there, and I'm going to go here. Now when I do that, if I go to the Data tab, you'll see now I have a new group of tools called Analysis. And in this, I have the Data Analysis Toolpak. So let's take a second and chat about that for a minute. The Data Analysis Toolpak in Excel is a very polarizing thing. Most people that work in stats exclusively do not use this as a tool. It sort of works like SPSS in that there's a level of automation that happens. It's just not the most robust of tools out there. Depending on what you're doing, though, it's just fine, right? And we've discussed this in class just a little bit already. So you can do some types of ANOVA, you can do some types of t-tests, but you just don't have a ton, and you don't have a lot of assumption checks that are built in. But what you do have that we'll work with right now is you do have moving average. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK here. Okay. So the first thing it's going to say is, where's my input data? All right, no problem. So I'm going to jump over here, and I'm going to grab all of my input data, including, there we go, the labels. Okay. And what I have to do is I'm going to actually have to tell it. I'm going to have to tell it what the interval of my data is. Now, when it says interval, what you really want is going to be your seasonality. So one of the hiccups with moving average, which you saw before, is that you actually have to know what the seasonality is. So I knew when I set up my moving average that I wanted to do a 4-quarter season moving average, right? So in here, I'm going to have to say we're doing a 4-quarter moving average. Okay. We have the ability to include our standard error, so that's kind of handy, right? We learned about that in our previous video. We have the ability to do a chart output if we need to. And the last thing we're going to do is we're going to give ourselves an output range. So I'll just go ahead and select all of these. And let's just see what we get. Okay. So this is the standard error that you're seeing here. Okay. Here's your chart, which is the same chart that I just created. So it's kind of cluttered here. So let's delete this. This was the chart we created originally, so we'll just take that away. Here's the chart that we created. Here's the chart that Excel created. And actually what you're seeing here, so you see the forecast and you see the actual. It's the exact same thing that we just created, right? So here's the actual and there's the forecasted value. Just looks a little different. So this, what you're seeing here, is going to be your standard error. Okay. And what you'll see is the moving average, just like we did. So this is our manual calculation. Okay. That's our manual calculation. That's the Excel calculation. It basically did the exact same thing. Okay. It did that exact same thing for us. So that is moving average. That's how it works. Okay. And you'll see that all it did for you is it actually just did the math for you, basically. Okay, so it just did all the math for you. And in this particular case, moving averages is very simple. And what I really want to stress to you is not so much how to push the buttons. It's pretty easy to figure out pushing the buttons, but understand that that moving average prediction is really great when you've got seasonal data, because this trend line that you're going to draw that you'll use to model or do some kind of prediction is going to be a lot smoother than what we would get if we tried to use a linear model. So that is moving averages in Excel. Tune back in and I'll talk to you a little bit about ETS, which stands for extra triple smoothing, and the ETS seasonality function, which will show you how to look at data not knowing the seasonality and predict what the seasonality is. So tune back in shortly. This is moving averages, and we'll talk again in just a minute.